So the double C's at the beginning of Clever and Kate. And if we're going even more specific, that is fricative alliteration. Okay. A word that imitates a sound, for example, buzz and pop. Okay, nice. Speedy on this one. Most people, it is onomatopoeia. It's not a simile because that's when you compare things with like or as. Which film is this from? When it loads. No, a few people got The Wizard of Oz. The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is a different franchise. Which sentence uses the comma correctly? It is the blue one. There's a subordinate clause in there. Santa, who happens to be my brother-in-law, crashed his sleigh into a tree. Which sentence contains the correct punctuation? There's one person who's on the edge on this one. It is. You've got a nice apostrophe. It can't have been red because there was no apostrophe on the don't, whereas there is on the blue. Where does the Grinch live? Hey, on Mount Crumpit, just north of Hoover. Where is the apostrophe mistake? It is the yellow one. There is an error here. It shouldn't be the apostrophe after the S. It should be after the A because Santa is one person. Whereas to have it after the S suggests multiple Santas. So it is that one. Okay. How much estimated money will the UK spend on Christmas this year? Rogue question. But why not? It's a lot of money, let me tell you that. Yeah, it's a lot more than you would think it is. Whoever designed this quiz wanted to get the capitalist agenda in there for some reason. Why not? The snow lay like a soft blanket over the sleeping town. What device is used? It is a simile. We've got lay like a soft blanket. We've got the comparison of the snow to the blanket using like. It's not a metaphor because we've got like in there, and it's not personification because the snow hasn't been given any human-like traits. In fact, it's been compared to a blanket, which is an inanimate object. Who says bar humbug in A Christmas Carol? Really famous story. It is Scrooge. Okay, halfway through now. What's a female turkey called? Random question to throw in? Why not? It's a hen. It is a hen. Um, yeah, gobble is just kind of the onomatopoeic sound that they make. A rooster, completely different animal. And gander is a verb meaning to look at something. In which decade was the first televised Christmas address from a British monarch? Think about when TVs were invented. It is the 1950s. Queen Elizabeth I was coronated in 1953, so it would make sense that it was in 1950s. And Elizabeth II, sorry, not first. True or false? The word Christmas has its origin from the old term Christi's Mace, meaning Christ's Mass. It is true. It is true. Which of the following is a proper noun? It is Santa Claus because Santa Claus is a name of a person, so that's the proper noun. The first dedicated Doctor Who Christmas special was broadcast in 2005, featuring which actor as the Doctor? Might be a little bit old for you guys, but it might have some Doctor Who fans. It was David Tennant. Nobody knew that. Clearly, we've not got any sci-fi fans in the room. Which sentence contains the rule of three? It is. Scrooge is a mean-spirited, that's one, miserly, two, unpleasant man. That's three adjectives in a row. So it is the blue. It's not going to be the yellow one, because there is no no description there. But it is going to be the green one because you've got oh Christmas tree, how lovely are your branches. There's three separate statements, all in an order. Okay. Jingle bells, jingle all the way. Finish the line. Well, not finish line is an example of what? Sorry. Which kind of technique is used in that? It is an example of repetition and a rule of three. Repetition in the repeated jingle, and then rule of three because you've got jingle bells one, jingle bells two, jingle all the way, three uses of jingle. Okay, Last Christmas is a song by, again, some of these might be a little old for you, but hopefully you know. It is Wham! Of course it is. Okay. Which sentence contains an oxymoron? Okay. Only two people got this one. The joyful chaos of Christmas morning filled the house. It's the joyful chaos. Because by the definition of chaos, it suggests something that's almost quite horrifying, quite sad. Whereas joy is potentially the opposite of that. A lot of people, I get why people went with yellow, because you got the rang loudly across the silent streets. Not necessarily juxtaposition because they're not next to each other, but it's definitely juxtaposition rather than oxymoron because there is still contrast there. Remember, we went through the difference last time between oxymorons and juxtaposition. Juxtapositions are ideas, oxymorons are singular words. What is the name of the last ghost that visits Scrooge in A Christmas Carol? Okay, it is a Christmas yet to come. Get why people would put future, but technically not the correct answer. Okay. What is the name of this British actor who plays Scrooge? It's Michael Caine. Michael Gove is the Secretary of Education, I think. Or used to be. Which of the following contains an adverb? It is good. This one was got nice and quickly. It is the yellow. It is skillfully. It's a way that we're describing how he's doing something, describing the verb ending in ly. Okay, almost to the end now. Who sings this? Hey, there's some Bob Dylan fans. Yeah, Bob Dylan. Okay. In the movie Elf, what is the name? What name does Buddy give to the Arctic puffin he befriends? There's maybe more Christmas questions than I would have liked in this, but there you go. Hey, no one got this. To be honest, I wouldn't have known either. I'm being honest with you. Okay. Which of the following sentence contains an abstract noun? Oh, this one's kind of caught people off a little bit, getting less answers on this one. Hey, it is the green one. Happiness and joy filled the room. Um, the abstract nouns are happiness and joy. They're concepts rather than being proper. Um, yes. Whereas here in red, the noun is the streets, well, that's a thing. In blue, it's the beard, which is a thing. And then tequila shots. Yeah, I feel like this is slightly maybe too mature for you. My bad. What is the name of this Christmas song? Lovely, we all know it. What do we mean by connotation? We've looked at connotations a lot recently. Hey, it's a word, what is suggested or associated with a word. So when you say connotations, it's not the literal meaning, but the figurative meaning beyond its literal definition. What we mean, what we associate with that word. And we're going to do some revision of that today also. Okay, last three. Who sings this? Okay, Rich. Okay, last two, and then we'll get on. Who sings this? Probably something more English based, but hey ho. Mhm. Okay, one more person. Hopefully, should be obvious. It is Billie Eilish. No one knows who Billie Eilish is. Thought I was a popular singer for you guys. And last one. Barry thinks this song from the animated film Snowman is, and again, this is just Pure gas. Okay, one last chance for the last person to get in before I skip it. It's all of the above. Why not? Okay, I thought it was less English related than I was hoping, but fun nonetheless. Nice, well done. Okay, so it's the holiday. I knew that I was going to have less people here today. So I didn't want to move on to anything new because there's not enough people here. So I thought what we would do is let's do a little bit of revision, a little bit of a discussion over everything that we've covered. Barry is not my first name. I don't know who made that quiz. Yes, somebody called Barry. I didn't make that quiz. I just thought it looked cool and be fun. Um, so, we've looked a lot at language in fiction, and I kind of want to leave this behind after today, but I thought we'd do a little bit of revision on it. I've got 10 questions lined up. I love you guys because you participate, and I'm hoping I get participation today too. So, what we're going to do is work our way through these revision questions and see how much you have learnt over the past few months. And I've made them more Christmassy as well, because why not? So, first question. Darkness is cheap and Scrooge liked it. These questions are all based on techniques that we've looked at together and how you can describe the effect on the reader. And I've broken the questions down into various stages. So, what are the connotations of the word darkness? What does the darkness symbolize? And how does this make the reader think or understand Scrooge's personality at the beginning of the novella? So, nice, Samir. We've got connotations of darkness, gloomy and mysterious. I love it. Of course. Yeah, when you think of darkness, you think it's something definitely mysterious, almost a bit eerie, a bit frightening in a way. Anything else that you might associate with darkness? What about if there was, I guess, someone said murky. I like that as well. Murky is a nice way of thinking about it. Again, there's no wrong answers here. Anything else? What might it symbolize? The darkness. Very similar to connotation, but if it had to give it a theme of some sort, darkness, what might it represent beyond itself? Someone said death. I think I said, oh, I said, multiple people, death. Possibly. That's a very morbid thing to think, but possibly death. I think if you go a bit lighter than death, maybe. I think you're on the right lines there. Nightmares, evil, all of these things, I would agree. So if we're thinking about these words, summing them up, we've got death and nightmares and evil, gloomy, mysterious, murky, melancholic, powerless, hopeless. Love all these beautiful ways of thinking about it. So we apply that then to this third question. How does all of that make you, let me rephrase actually. What does that help you to understand about Scrooge's character? If darkness is cheap and Scrooge liked it, he likes the darkness. Someone said lonely, powerless, hopeless, depressed. Yeah, all of these things are great. Anything else? A lot of people talked about death and gloominess and mystery. Anything we can link to that? Someone said neglects things, unfriendly, depressed old man. Absolutely. I agree. And I think you've grasped spot on what this is about. Like always, my answers are not the be all and end all. They're just examples. But this is what I went for. I think there's connotations of fear, secrecy, negativity, coldness. But I think gloomy, murky, they're all great as well. Um, and I think if we're thinking about what it tells us about him, potentially that he's miserable and miserly, unfriendly, the fact he's maybe got quite a spiteful, bitter personality, that he's got quite a selfish attitude. If we associate him to the death and the darkness and the evil and the gloominess, and we apply that to his personality, I think it tells us all of those things. Very nice. Okay. Hard and sharp as flint. Which language device is used here? What are the connotations of the word flint? And how does this make the reader feel about Scrooge's attitude towards other people? And what is his attitude? Simile. Yeah, Samir is right. It is a simile. And we know that because we've got the comparison using the word as. So it's hard and sharp as flint. So there is a simile there. Um, so cheap. Possibly. Flint is a material that you use to make fire with, if that helps. And it's not, it's like a rock-like material. So think of like hard and sharp. So it's an ash. Nice way of thinking about it. It's kind of, think it more like rock. When you think of rock, what do you think of? Like really hard rock. Someone said, no smoothness, no mercy, hopeless. Yeah, all of those are absolutely great. Anything else? Imagine if you were trying to, I don't know, climb a rock or get through rock. And then how could we link that to what we can understand about his attitudes towards other people? What does it tell us about him and how he acts towards other people? If he's being described as sharp as flint on a metaphoric level beyond the literal. Any ideas before I move on? I knew we were going to be a bit quieter today. Hopeless, no emotion. I like it. I agree. I went with this. I think simile is absolutely correct. When I think of flint and stone, I think maybe something that's quite unyielding, cold, like emotionless, no smoothness, tough, something that's possibly dangerous. Um, Therefore, if we kind of link all those things to his personality, it kind of tells us that, like Stone, he's very unfeeling and he's harsh and he's mean towards other people. He's bitter and scolding. And therefore, how do we feel about him is we're probably quite critical of him. We probably dislike him because he is quite mean and horrible and all those things. So this is what we're doing today, just some revision. The snow danced across the rooftops, laughing in the moonlight. Which language device is used here? What are the connotations of the word danced? And how does this make the reader feel about the snow specifically? Have a little think about that. So somebody already said personification is correct. And the reason being because the snow is given human qualities. It's being described as dancing, which is not something that the inanimate object of snow does. Only humans dance. Okay, think about question two then. What are the connotations of dancing? If you were to dance, why might you do it? Put yourself in those shoes. How might you be feeling when you're dancing? How does it make you feel? Someone said happy and lots of energy, merry, calm, freedom, warmth, joy, happiness. All of these words are perfect and on the right lines. Nice. Okay, so if we're then taking all of those words, which are all correct, and we're linking it to question three, how does this make the reader feel about the snow? Like if it was your friend and they were feeling happy and merry and calm and warm, how does it make you feel about the snow? Give it a couple 30 seconds, just be able to get that answers in. Let's have a look. Someone said excited, joyful, amazed. Yeah, possibly. I think, yeah, on the right lines. The snow itself symbolizes peace, hope, and calmness. I love that you've brought in a second um, language device, the symbolism. Absolutely, the snow could represent that. Okay, so this is what I went with because I think you're all absolutely right. Personification, correct. It's giving human qualities. A lot of people said like joyful and playful and lively. Anything along those lines, I think, is absolutely correct. And if we think about how that affects us, the reader, somebody said excitement. I agree. I think it makes the reader feel excited about Christmas, about the snow, almost as if it's trying to represent this joyful childhood, this magic that comes with Christmas, because the snow itself symbolizes purity and wonder and absolutely like hope and calm. All the things that as a kid you love about Christmas. Therefore, giving the scene a very cheerful and festive mood. Absolutely. Someone said, "Is this a Christmas lesson?" Yeah, it's a Christmas lesson. It's a Christmas holidays. Um, just the festive parts of it, though. Why not? And then we'll, after Christmas next week, we won't be doing this anymore. I just want to make it a bit fun, you know? Okay. Secret and self-contained and solitary. Um, which language device has been used? What are the connotations of the word secret? Or you could talk about self-contained and solitary. And how does this influence the reader's sympathy towards Scrooge? So, someone said sibilance. It is sibilance, but it's also another technique within that as well. What else has been used? Anything else? You've got the repeated letters. There's a few things in here. There's multiple language devices in here. If it helps, don't think about the Christmas, just think about the language devices. It's purely themed around Christmas. Not really the religious aspect, more the holiday aspect. You know, snow and trees and Santa and stuff like that, you know. Nothing religious. We're not religious here. We don't do that. A few people, triplets. Yeah, there's a rule of three here. Secret, self-contained, solitary. Three adjectives in um, consecutive order. There's also one more thing. It's a full of language devices. We've got sibilants, we've got the rule of three. We've also got repeated letters at the beginning of words. Anyone know what that is? I give you it. It's alliteration. We've got secret, self-contained, solitary, all beginning with the same letter. What are the connotations of secrets and self-containment and solitary? Come back to the sibilants. Think about the connotations. What do you think of beyond the literal when you think about secrecy and secrets? Anyone got any ideas? If you were to hold a secret or know somebody who had a secret, what do you think of? Maybe you think about mystery because you're wondering what that person's secret is. Maybe you feel quite lonely and isolated because you want to tell somebody the secret, but you know that you can't. So think about how you would feel if you had a secret that you just couldn't share with anybody. And then think about then how that influences in turn the sympathy that we have towards Scrooge, who in this context is the one that is secret, self-contained, and solitary. Someone said, oh, it's deception, disguise, might resent doom and loneliness. Absolutely. I love the way that you've put that, deception. Not the way that I thought about it, but absolutely a correct way of thinking about it. Deception, disguise. Love it. Okay, so apply that then. What does that tell you about the character of Scrooge? What does it tell you about him? Have a look at think. I'll give you 10 more seconds and then I'll tell you what I thought. A bit quiet today. Okay, I went with this. There is sibilant alliteration in there. You've got the repeated letter S's. You've got the rule of three, and you've got a semantic field. I know that's not something that we've necessarily covered, but I wanted to mention it as fact that it is in there. Um, Someone said he did not, yeah, he did not be merry. He's not merry and calm in a celebratory way. Yeah, absolutely. He's not, yeah, he's not well liked. I think I agree with that. To me, I think all these words represent something that's hidden and private, mysterious. And if you held a secret, it might make you feel quite lonely, quite isolated, quite trapped. And if we apply it to the character of Scrooge, it emphasizes his isolation, therefore helping the reader to understand his loneliness and lack of openness. And if we're thinking further about the sibilance aspect of it, we said that sibilance represents two things. It's either sadness or it's sinister. And I think it could be either in this context. I think sadness maybe a little bit, because he might be lonely and isolated and therefore feel quite sad. Or it could be sinister if you look at it that way, as long as you could argue it. But I agree. Isolation is absolutely right. Okay, next then. The Christmas tree was a beacon of hope in the dark living room. Again, ignore Christmas. You know, it's all right if we don't all celebrate Christmas. Which language device has been used? What are the connotations of beacon? And how does this make the reader feel about the owner of the Christmas tree? Okay, let's have a look. Someone said metaphor, metaphor. Absolutely right. It is a metaphor because it was a beacon of hope in the dark. It's being compared to something else. Now, what might be the connotations of beacon? When you think of a beacon, what do you think of beyond the literal? A beacon might be something that calls for you. It might be a light, it might be a sound. Someone said big room of light. Yes, because it was a beacon and it's got to be big enough to get your attention. So yeah, possibly. Saving you from defeat. Lovely way of thinking about it. A beacon is something that beckons you, it calls to you to get your attention. If we're linking it to the owner of the Christmas tree, they're saying that their tree was a beacon for them. So if we think about how they feel and what we understand about them, what might could you say? Oh, lovely. Someone said hope and rescue from being lost. A lovely way to put it. Because what if this person is feeling quite lost? We've got this idea of hope. If you're without hope, you're lost. So it's a nice way of working backwards. Absolutely. Anything else? Happy, festive, relief, juxtaposition. Oh, I hadn't thought about it, but there is juxtaposition in there. There's beacon of hope contrasted to the dark living room, which I think makes the point even more poignant. It's this beacon of optimism in maybe someone's very lost and lonely and sad life. Absolutely. I went with this. It's definitely a metaphor. When I think of beacons, I think of guidance. It's something that tells you where to go. It helps you navigate your life, whether physically or metaphorically. It represents warmth, light, hope, sanctuary, even. When I think of a sanctuary, it's something that's safety. Safe, sorry. The owner might be a lonely, doomed, miserable character who thinks will be merry by celebrating Christmas. Oh, maybe that's a lovely way of thinking about it. Definitely similar to what I said. It makes the reader feel sympathy for the owner as the tree becomes a symbol of hope in a saddening time. The tree acts as a sanctuary in their time of loss. It's a comfort, really. But I think you also worded it in a very nice way that they might be lonely, they might be miserable, and that this is their like relief, I think. Okay. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen. Which language device has been used? What are the connotations of now and on? And how does this technique make the reader think about the actions that are being stated? Someone said exclamatory bossy verbs. Yeah, you know what? I hadn't thought about that, but you're absolutely right. We've definitely got the exclamatory exclamations there. I mean, we've literally got five, six exclamation marks. Very imperative as well. The now and the on, their orders. Yeah, absolutely. Triplets. Possibly. Maybe could argue against triplets because triplets are when you have three of something specifically. But I think here there's one, two, four in this sentence. One, two, three again, four in the next one. So I'd argue maybe not quite triplets, but definitely something along the same vibe. Rhyming, again, not something I'd considered, but absolutely right. There is a more obvious point in this. Anyone noticed it? Look at the specific words that I used. Alliteration, again, could argue. I think there's even more. I think it's repetition. We've got now, 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 on. I think there's repetition in there of the verbs, of the imperative exclamatory verbs. Absolutely. So, when you think of the words now and on, what do you think of? What kind of things does it make you feel? What kind of things might somebody who's saying those things think and feel? Put yourself in their shoes. Getting ready for a ball, possibly. Yeah, yeah, yeah. If you were, these are quite commanding verbs. Why might somebody use such exclamatory commanding verbs? Like they're ordering someone to do something. Any ideas before I go through what I have said? Okay, I went for this. I said definitely repetition, but I think there is rhyming in there. I really liked that. Um, the now and the on to me suggests urgency, excitement. There's definitely some sort of severity of the situation. Some of the speed, lightning, energy, tension, action, speediness, hastiness. Beautiful. There is speed and there is haste, is exactly what is being conveyed here. It makes the reader feel the action and the energy of the departure. It presents the urgency, the severity, showing that time is of the essence. But I liked the phrasing in the hastiness. Absolutely. The tension. Beautiful. Okay. I've only got a few more now. I think there's three more. The bittersweet taste of Christmas cookies reminded her of childhood. Which language device has been used? What are the connotations of bittersweet? And how/what does this technique make the reader understand about the woman? What do you think her childhood was like? Okay, we've got a few contrasting ideas here in the chat. Someone said metaphor. I would argue this is maybe not a metaphor because a metaphor is when you compare something to something else. Um, but here it's saying it reminded her of childhood. So it's not saying that these cookies are childhood. It's just the act of reminding. Oxymoron is correct. It's two conflicting words placed next to each other. If something is bitter, realistically, it can't really be sweet at the same time. So they're contrasting words put next to each other. Why do you think that is? When you think of bittersweet, what do you think of? Someone said very much like Sweet Sorrow and Romeo and Juliet. Absolutely, yeah. When you think of bittersweet, why might somebody compare something to being bittersweet? Pick it apart a little bit. Sweet is something that's like really nice. Bitter is something that's quite hard to take, quite um almost, I don't want to say sour, but that of the essence. So why might something be bittersweet? Because bitter has connotations of not really liking it, or maybe has negative connotations. Whereas sweet is definitely more positive in the connotations it gives off. So if we're thinking about specifically linking that to her childhood, what does it tell us about her childhood? That it was maybe both negative and positive. Maybe there were, I don't know, contrasting elements. Um, Life that is normally merry and peaceful is now sad. I agree. I think, yeah, I think maybe it's something where she has sad memories, but then she also has positive memories. And so it's like a bit of a hard thing to think about the past, maybe. Yeah. Ups and downs, I think, is a really nice summarized way to put it. There's absolutely ups and downs. So I said this. It's definitely an oxymoron. And bittersweet has definitely connotations of nostalgia, mixed emotions, something that's happy, sad, there's ups and downs. And it helps the reader to understand the character's complex emotions. I think complexity is a nice way to put it, evoking a sense of nostalgia. Okay, two more, I think. The jingle of bells echoed through the frosty air. What language device has been used? What are the connotations of jingle? And what does this make the reader feel? Okay. Slightly harder one to spot. Any ideas? They start with the language device. If something is jingling, think about what it sounds like. Sound is a clue there. I'll give you it. It is. Oh no, no, no. Onomatopoeia. Yes, it is. It's a sound. It's a sound that replicates an action because you can jingle something, but it's also a sound. What are the connotations of jingle? Is it a nice sound? Is it not a nice sound? When something jingles, when might you hear something jingling? What kind of scenarios would you be in if something was jingling? Someone said it might be literally as well. Maybe her thinking about childhood might have affected. Oh, we're still on the past question. Someone said nice, nice. Um, okay. Connotations of jingle. When might you hear it? Somewhere jingling sound. Think about as well, it echoed through the frosty air. Is there anything, other techniques there as well? Merriment, excitement, definitely. Anything else? I think jingling is quite a positive, hopeful thing. Here, in this context, it's contrasted to something that's maybe not so positive, the frosty air, which to me has connotations of like harshness, something again that's quite bitter, painful, suffering. That's contrasted to something that's quite a positive sound. Warmth and merriment through the homeless, doomed atmosphere. Possibly. This is what I said. I think there's a little bit also of juxtaposition in there as we contrast the positive to the negative. Um, to me, jingling has like cheerful, festive, lively connotations of hope and peace. Definitely a positive thing. And if we contrast it to something quite negative, it almost makes us feel quite optimistic. Like if I was stuck in the snow and I heard in the distance like jingling bells, you'd feel, I don't know, a bit positive, a bit nice, wouldn't you? Almost like it's like a hope or a symbol of hope in the distance. Yeah, it symbolizes hope and peace, which contrasts very much the somber and eerie connotations of the frostiness. This is key stage three, kind of going on to key stage four a little bit. We'll start the key stage four session in 10 minutes. We normally start at 8:15 for that. Okay, we've got time for another one. I think we've got time for maybe we'll get through our last two, maybe just this one. From fire, from flood, and from wrath of God. Which language device has been used? What are the connotations of the words fire, flood, and wrath? And how does this make the reader understand about the seriousness of Marley's warnings? Triplet, straight off the bat, absolutely, there's a triplet in there. There's a rule of three. Anything else? Because there is one more technique in there. Think about our F, fire, from, flood, from, wrath of God. There is sounds in there. Alliteration, yes, there is. There's a rule of three and there's alliteration. What might be the connotations of fire and flooding and wrath? When you think about those words, what does it make you think of? It's not necessarily sibilance because there's no S sounds, but there is a repeated F sound, which is a different type of Phonetic. Okay, so thinking about the fire, flooding, and wrath. When you think about fire, what do you think of? Maybe like aggression, maybe. If somebody speaks with fire, it's quite spiteful, it's aggression, it's passion. Flooding is like overwhelming. Like if you were within a flood, you'd feel very overwhelmed, you'd feel overpowered, quite trapped. And then wrath, very much violence again. So putting someone said depression and aggression, absolutely. So thinking about linking that to the ghosts of Marley from A Christmas Carol, how might the triplet of the associations that we have with these words affect the seriousness of Marley's warnings? It spells negativity. There's obviously like a negative power there. Nice. I like the view of that. Yeah, I think absolutely. I'm going to speed on because there's one more to do. I went with this. I think anger, danger, punishment, entrapment, being overpowered, force, consumed. And if we link that to the ghost, I think we've got this imagery of entrapment and almost punishment, which evoke an idea of suffering and pain, which scares the reader. Okay, and we got one more, and then we'll call it done. Bar humbug. Which language devices have been used? What are the connotations of bar? And what does this make the reader feel about Scrooge's attitude towards Christmas? This one's a slightly more difficult one. It was sort of one of our newer techniques that we covered. I think it was session 8, I think. Can you remember what this is or was? There is an exclamation in there. It is an exclamatory phrase, but there's something else. Not necessarily onomatopoeia. It's not really a sound. I wouldn't be offended if you didn't get this because it was one of our newer, more difficult techniques to spot. If something is slang language, if it's very informal, what technique was that? Because that's what this is. It's a very informal, slang-like phrase. It is colloquial language. It's exactly that. The colloquial language. Why might Scrooge have used exclamatory colloquial language? What does that tell us about his attitude towards Christmas? Annoyed and agitated. Lovely way to put it. Very nice. Anything else? It's definitely more of a negative thing than it is positive. Like it was nice to summarize with annoyed and agitated. What effect might the colloquial nature of this phrase have on that, on the annoyance and the agitation? Any ideas before we finish? Before I tell you what I got? Someone said finds it depressive, pressurizing, annoying. Absolutely. So I went with this. I think there is colloquial language and possibly some plosive consonants in there as well, with the B, the H, the B, and the G. And I think, yeah, dismissive, harsh, abrupt. But I liked when someone said agitated and annoyed and depressed. If we're linking it directly to Scrooge, I think it shows his negativity towards Christmas, makes the reader see him as grumpy and unkind, and the colloquial language emphasizes that dismissive and grumpy attitude. And that rejection also kind of makes us feel a little bit resentful. Okay, right. That's key stage 3 done. Um, Thank you for coming. I kind of knew there would be lower numbers today. I hope you have a nice school holiday. We are on next week if you do want to come, so you're welcome. Again, we won't be doing anything massive because I get limited numbers again, but we will move on to something different. If you've got anything specific that you want me to go through, I'll stay around for these 5 minutes whilst I set up for the Key Stage 4 GCSE session, but otherwise, have a lovely holiday with whatever you plan to do with it. Also, you are welcome to stay with GCSE as well, because we're going to continue our AO1 work that we were doing a couple of weeks ago. But we're also going to do a Christmas English language quiz as well. Um, Actually, yeah, can I send you the Inspector Call slides, message back at your advice? Yeah, the folder has literally been made this week. I thought it had been made a few weeks ago. Mrs. Siddiqui what has done it and has done it now. Apologies, I was ill last week, so I just completely forgot to upload everything when he did it last week. But yeah, I'll do it. I'm in tomorrow, so I will. There's a folder where I will update everything on the system now. So I will upload everything tomorrow when I'm in the afternoon. Yeah. Someone's like Gothic literature and a Shakespeare play. I think we briefly looked at Gothic literature last year. It was one of the very first things that we did. Um, so I'll upload those slides as well for you because we did briefly look at a Gothic literature. Very briefly, but we did. In terms of Shakespeare plays, I'm trying to avoid Shakespeare for Key Stage 3 because it's more of a importance for GCSE. Um, yeah, I'll update all the slides with you can I'll give you access to all the Gothic literature stuff that we did. Okay, for all the Key Stage 4 GCSE students, here is our Kahoot. But yeah, if there's anything else English language related that you want me to go over, please do, because I'm thinking about doing some very basic spelling, punctuation, and grammar stuff, as well as maybe moving on to some structure, things like that. So let me know. So if you are staying from the previous session, this is a different quiz, because I know from last time it was the same. But yeah, we'll give it another 2 minutes. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You too. Can you show me how to answer question 3 on paper 1, please? Which exam board? Because question 3 varies between exam boards. AQA. Are we talking English language? Because that is um, structure for paper. Yeah, structure seems to be something that a lot of people struggle with. Um, Absolutely it is. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm very happy to go over structure because it is something that people find difficult, which you shouldn't, because it's literally the same as the language question, question 2. All it wants is 3 to 4 Peter paragraphs, except instead of language devices, it wants structural devices. I think the confusion comes because a lot of people aren't familiar with the structural devices. So I'm more than happy to do that. I'm going to finish the AO1 stuff, which will be next week. And then the week after, I'm more than happy to move on to structure for GCSE because it is something that people struggle with, definitely more than language. It is for AQA, structure is its own separate question. For other exam boards, they don't really care as much about structure compared to language. But yeah, I'm more than happy to do that because it is a general confusion across people. Okay, if you just joined, welcome. We've got our revision Kahoot Christmas themed quiz for GCSE. I give you another minute because I've only got 2 people. There's 11 people in this chat. Can we go over some language paper 2? Is this also for AQA? Because my plan for language is to work my way through the assessment objectives, because it makes more sense that way. Just because multiple people do different exam boards, so for me to just focus on AQA and do one paper, it means that not many people, some people won't, be involved. So I'm going to work my way through assessment objectives because they're all the same across all exam boards. So we will do all of paper 2 AQA. Just it might just be more spread out than just doing all the paper at once. So literature better. I agree. I wanted to do more literature. However, um, the general feedback that we got about these sessions was that literature was not necessarily a viable or feasible thing to teach because everyone does different texts. Um, so I've been advised to focus on language. But come nearer exams, maybe we might do more literature. We'll see. I liked doing it. Okay, right. Has everyone joined that wants to join? Any other questions before we make a start? I don't know next time for literature. I'm going to be honest with you because it was I get what was told to me. I think it was a difficult thing to teach given that different people do different texts. So we have, as a team, decided to focus more on English language, considering that is the compulsory GCSE and is the more important one at the end of the day. Okay, right. Let's make a start. But yeah, anything else you want me to go through? I'm more than happy to do structure next. We'll focus on AO2 next, which is language and structure, and I'm more than happy to do that. And at some point, we will have covered all of paper two for language. So, okay, good luck. And as always, if you don't have access to the quiz, you can put your answers in the chat as well. Okay, in Last Christmas by Wham, the last line, Last Christmas I gave you my heart, uses which language device? I'm not sure why there's no sound. There we go. Okay, it is symbolism. I gave you my heart is symbolic, really, in the nature. Because a heart symbolizes love and passion and dedication. Okay. In All I Want for Christmas Is You, the phrase make my wish come true appeals to which sense? Okay, it is our emotion. Okay. In Do You Hear What I Hear? The line, a star dancing in the night, is an example of what? Okay, the Kahoot code, if you need it, is 7739385. Okay, it was personification. I guess, I don't know, I would have allowed imagery. I didn't make this quiz, but I would have allowed that because if you can see it in your head, that's imagery. And personally, I can see that. But the reason they've gone for personification is because stars can't literally dance. That's a very human trait. Someone said, can we please do creative writing? Um, yeah, I'm gonna at some point move on to creative writing. And I'm gonna give you some tips for creative writing, as well as a list of ambitious vocabulary that I think is well suited to that question. In The Grinch, the line, you're as cuddly as a cactus, uses which language device? Okay, it is a simile because we've got a comparison between the Grinch and the cactus using the words as. So it's not a metaphor because we've got as. It's not illusion because we're not alluding to anything, we're not referring to anything, and it's not irony. Okay. Okay, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer uses repetition of Rudolph's name to. Okay, it is great emphasis on his uniqueness. Because people went with show contrast with the other reindeer. Yes, also would have allowed that as well if I was making this quiz. Okay. In the Polar Express, the phrase believe in the magic of Christmas uses which language device to inspire hope? It is emotive language, thing using words that bring up certain emotions, like the magic of Christmas. Kind of has connotations of beauty and um, purity and things like that. It's not necessarily hyperbole because that's exaggeration. Whereas I'm not necessarily seeing exaggeration here. Okay, in the song, it's beginning to look a lot like Christmas. It frequently uses imagery. What is the purpose of imagery? Hey, to evoke a festive atmosphere. A couple of people went with convey a sense of nostalgia. I agree. You know what? I think whoever wrote this quiz should have given multiple answers aloud because yeah, I do think it conveys nostalgia. I think they've been a bit mean on that. In Elf, Buddy repeatedly says, Santa, I know him. What device is being used here? It is exclamation. We've got multiple uses of exclamation marks. It's not alliteration because there's no words that begin with the same letter in consecutive order or next to each other. Okay. In Home Alone, the phrase keep the change, you filthy animal relies on. Okay. Direct address. Yeah, it's right because it's talking to somebody. Um, yeah, it's the right word. It's the right way to go. A lot of people went with sarcasm. Um, yeah, I wouldn't agree that it was sarcasm. Baby, it's cold outside. Uses the phrase, but baby, you'll freeze out there. What language device is present? It is hyperbole. It's exaggeration. She's not literally going to freeze. It's more referring to that she'll get really cold, but she's not literally going to freeze to ice. Um, Foreshadowing, possibly. I kind of get the understanding because it's almost inferring or suggesting that she will freeze. But again, because it's not literal, foreshadow is kind of a 50-50. The phrase Christmas won't be the same without you from various holiday movies uses which language technique? It is emotive language. Um, because it's playing on the senses, it's playing on the love aspect of it, the feeling of being wanted, almost evoking a sadness, that somebody won't be there for Christmas like they normally are. In Home Alone, the recurrence of the family forgetting Kevin is an example. Or it's repetition because it keeps repeating. It's something that happens over and over again. It's not necessarily foreshadowing. because they have forgotten Kevin. So it's not like something that will happen in the future because it's already happened. So it is a repetition. The opening montage in Elf, showing Buddy growing up at the North Pole, is an example of what? And this is an example of one of our structural devices. Okay. Oh, I would have gone with flashback. But exposition, yeah, I would have allowed flashback because it's something that's happened in the past. But I think they've gone with exposition because it's the opening of the film. But we know that the film is not set then, it's set in the present. So I would have allowed flashback. Both of those are aspects or structural devices anyway. Um, I would have allowed flashback. In Love Actually, the intertwining stories are an example of which structural device? It is a parallel narrative. There's lots of stories all coming together and happening at the same time in parallel. Okay. The climax of Home Alone occurs when? If you've seen it, that is. It's a good film. If you've not seen it, classic. Okay, Kevin sets up the traps for the burglars is absolutely right. So when we talk about climax, we're talking about like the most tense, serious moment. It's where the most of the action is. Yeah, setting up the for the traps. The family realizes Kevin is missing. That's kind of just after the climax because things are beginning to resolve themselves. So um, that's more the declining action. And then the burglars break into the house. That's the rising action, where we've not quite got to the main part yet, but we're building tension. Okay. In The Grinch, the resolution is marked by. So how does the film end? Okay. The Grinch returning the gifts. Yeah, the reason it's not I kind of, again, would have allowed 50-50. I think the Grinch's heart growing, yeah, is technically resolution. But I think they were going more along the thought pattern of what actually concludes the story. What brings everything back to the state of baseline norm. Well, it's in returning the gifts. That's what makes everything okay again. Whereas his heart growing is like the lesson learned rather than the wrap up of the story. The recurring refrain in Jingle Bells creates what effect? Okay, right. It is, yeah, it's a rhythm because it keeps repeating. It's making specific sounds. The opening shot of It's a Wonderful Life depicts the small town and introduce the angel. This serves as. It is setting the scene. It's introducing exposition again. It's not necessarily rising action because there's not really any tension created. There's not really conflict being introduced. It's more setting the scene, a bit of exposition. Okay, three more. In A Christmas Carol, Dickens writes, Reader, let me tell you, which persuasive technique is this? It is direct address. We've got the exact naming of the second person personal pronoun, you. It's directed at the reader. Okay, last three. The Grinch says, maybe Christmas doesn't come from a store. This is an example of slightly harder one here. Okay, an opinion. We could kind of narrow it down to get the right answer. It's not a fact because it's not a statement. It's not necessarily true. It's not emotive language because there's not really any words in there that make you feel a certain way. It's not an anecdote because that's a story. So it has to therefore be an opinion. Okay, two more. The line in 25 days, Christmas brings happiness to millions in advertisements is an example of what technique? Okay, it is statistics, yeah. It's giving numbers and quantitative values. And then last question. The phrase, don't let the Grinch steal your joy, uses which technique? Okay, it is imperative language. It's the don't. It's an instruction. Being told to do something makes it an imperative. Okay, let's see who has won our Christmas 2025 Step to Success Kahoot revision quiz. Nice. Well done. Okay. Right. So carrying on from what we were doing last time, um, we were looking at AO1 questions. And if we remember back, AO1 is really simple. It's about picking out quotes to support points. So basically reading through a text and picking out um, specific quotations. We looked at AO1A, which is, or rather comprises, most of the AO1 marks in an exam. It doesn't matter what exam board you do at GCSE language, AO1 is around 10% of every single English language paper, whether it's AQA, EDUCAS, OCR, EdExcel. They're all about 10%. And a really small percentage of that, usually 2 to 3%, is AO1B. And so I want to start thinking about this because last time we looked at AO1A, which was literally picking out statements of facts, saying if something was true or false. Whereas AO1B is slightly harder, but only very slightly. It normally requires picking similarities and differences between texts, but not necessarily with any analysis. But it does, however, require you to make some inferences. And if you've been with me from Key Stage 3, an inference is just something that you can work out from a text. Something that you're not directly told, but you can kind of evaluate and come up with based on evidence. And we kind of think of this as reading between the lines. So it's picking out subtext and connotations in order to form your own opinions. So today we're going to go through AQA and EDUCAS, and then we'll do OCR and Excel, and then we'll move on to some structure. But again, stay with me because the skill is exactly the same no matter the exam board. So the practice is useful no matter what. But for AQA specifically, it's only one question, and it's paper two, question two. And it's normally an 8 mark question. So for AQA, this is the biggest amount of marks of all the exam boards for this specific skill, which personally I don't like. I wouldn't want to do more of this skill. I think it's time consuming, But there you go. If you do AQA, it's 8 marks. And your questions will look like this. It tends to be you need to refer to both source A and source B. So you're not just looking at one text, you're looking at the entirety of two different texts. And you're then asked to compare the differences between a thing that's happening in the text. And I really wanted to point out that it is differences. Different exam boards are slightly different. AQA is just differences, so not similarities, purely what is different between texts. It doesn't require any analysis of methods, no language devices, no structural devices, none of that. Just simply point, quote, a little bit of inference. Very simple. So you do need to focus on making inferences, but it only needs to be in one sentence, something very simple that you can work out from a text. So my advice for this kind of question is to always read the entirety of the text very carefully and then choose exact quotes. Don't try and paraphrase, just pick out exact written quotes to support your ideas. And you only need one quote for each point that you make. And it's about 8 minutes for 8 marks. So looking at the mark scheme then, obviously, we would hope that we would like to be at level 4. We want that 7 to 8 mark range. So let's have a look at what you need to do to get there. It says that you need to make perceptive inferences from both texts. So the word inference has been literally written in the mark scheme. That just means reading between the lines, not just stating a simple fact, but giving it a tiny little bit of explanation about what you can work out, linking to the question. It also wants you to make judicious references. And what it means by that is picking out relevant quotes, but making sure that you add a quote for every single point that you make. So not just like one quote here and there, quote every point that you make. Because judicious means like a range. Okay, and it also wants perceptive differences between text. And what it means by that is not similarities, but differences that are well selected. So kind of beginning to look beyond the obvious a little bit. And I want to just kind of briefly say that it's 3 PEI paragraphs, and that's point, evidence, inference. So no analysis, no explanation, just one simple inference. Okay. So step by step, this is what I would do to approach this question. I would begin by highlighting what I call the context terms. Basically, what is this question asking you about? What is the topic? So as an example, the doctor in source A and the nurse in source B are working in different places. Write details from both sources to write a summary of what you understand about different places in which the doctor and nurse are working. So for me, these are the context phrases. You're looking for what you could understand about the different places that they are working. So we're focused purely on setting here. It doesn't just have to be physical things about the setting, though. It could be how the setting affects the people in the story, as long as it's related to setting. The next thing I would do is I would go through the entire text like I have done and highlight all of the relevant quotes. So I would read the question first, and then as you're reading through the texts, begin to highlight the things that might be relevant to that question. I'm obviously not going to read the entire of them to you now, but as an example, you can see that I've gone through and highlighted the bits that I thought were relevant and were linked to the workplace in each text. And I would do that before even trying to compare, because if you try and compare them, you're just losing time. I would highlight as you go through and then look for any comparisons and differences. So this is the structure that I would use. I would do point, evidence, inference, comparative word, point, evidence, inference, and then a link. Each one of those doesn't even need to be its own sentence. It could be, that's one sentence, point and evidence. That could be a separate sentence. That's all one sentence. So really, you only need 3 to 4 sentences per point. So it doesn't need to be long at all. Very simple statements of fact. with a little bit of something you can work out. So I'm going to show you some examples, and then I'm going to get you to have a go at some. So third thing I would do is pick one of the quotes that you highlighted and do a point, evidence, inference paragraph. So it might look like this. You trail behind like a hypnotized duckling, your head cocked to one side in a caring manner, noting down every pronouncement from your seniors. That is related to the workplace. If I was to think about a point that I was trying to make, what this quote tells me about the workplace, I might focus on the wording, the hypnotized duckling, the fact that you note down everything that your seniors say. The fact that he's got seniors and that he's so enthralled by them and they're like the main thing tells me that maybe this is a workplace that's got a hierarchy. He doesn't necessarily work independently. I know that from the quote here. So this is what I would say as an example. In source A, K shows that hospital work is dominated by hierarchy and strict system. That's my point. He says that as a junior doctor, you trail behind like hypnotized duckling, noting down every pronouncement from your seniors. My evidence. And then there's a little inference of something we can work out. I'm going to give a tiny, very brief explanation of what that tells me about the workplace. So still linking it back to the question. This demonstrates how little independence he has and how controlled his work environment is. That's all that's needed to get you some marks. For a second quote, let's say this is the one that I want to compare to that previous quote. Indeed, so strong was the old impulse within me that I waited for no permission, but seeing a poor artilleryman stretched upon a wooden pallet. So now I've got to think what's different between this one and the first one. Now, in the first one, I said that he's not independent, that he works, he's got a boss, and that the environment is quite a hierarchy and it's quite strict. Whereas here, I think it kind of shows the opposite. This person waited for no permission. So that tells me that there's not really a hierarchy. They're more independent. So that's my difference already. So I might say, contrastingly, that's my comparative word. In source B, SQL works in a less structured environment. So I've made my difference very clear. In the first one, I said there's a very strict, controlled environment, and in this one, there's a less structured environment. And it takes action on her own initiative. She explains that she waited for no permission, but seeing a poor artilleryman, ran up to him at once. This shows she is guided by compassion rather than orders. And then I would link very briefly just the quotes together. So while K is trapped by bureaucracy, SQL's setting allows freedom and moral courage. That's the structure I would take in this kind of question. Someone said statement, zoom, and link. Maybe that's the structure that you've been taught. This is personally the one that I would go down, but a statement, zoom, and link, if it works for you, absolutely. Okay. I've kind of also briefly wanted to remind you of connotations, but it's less so important here. So connotation is when a word has a deeper meaning beyond the literal. So it's things that you associate with a word that might be more figurative. So for example, blue is literally a color, but it also might figuratively represent sadness or loneliness. And we've been through these before, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. Okay. So you only need simple connotations. You don't need anything complicated. You know, it's not a language question. There's not a 16 marker. It's just really simple inferences. So, for example, I've given you a little step-by-step of how I would make a connotation. I would pick a keyword or phrase. I would ask, what does it make me think of? And I'd use that idea to explain the link back to the text. So, for example, while you're up on the wards, sailing the ship alone, a ship that's enormous and on fire, and that no one has really taught you how to sail. And if I was thinking about connotations here, I'd be thinking about the sailing the ship alone, the fact that no one's taught you how to sail. What does that tell me about how he feels in the workplace? Well, a ship that no one has taught him how to sail makes me think of a ship that is trying not to sink. So on a literal level, it's referring to a sinking ship. And if I was in that situation, because I would always put myself in somebody else's shoes to get to work out the inference, I would probably be panicking. I'd be struggling if I was trying to stay afloat on a sinking ship. Therefore, if I link it back to the question, which is specifically about the workplace, maybe it tells me that he, the author, is struggling to stay afloat in his own job, and that he feels almost quite frustrated and panicky. So I'd always put myself in the shoes of the situation, and then I'd always make sure to link it back to the specific topic of the question. But inferences go slightly further, just one step further. So, as I said, I'd put yourself into the situation and think about how you feel and what you would be thinking in the situation. So, for example, if I was struggling to cope at work, I would feel unfulfilled and overwhelmed. So, that might be the inference that comes with this quote. So, for example, I've given you it here. The point might be that Kay's experience being a doctor feels frustrating and isolating. The quote is the one I've given you. And then the inference is that it reveals how unsupported and overwhelmed he feels in the job, and that maybe he feels unfulfilled and frustrated by it. A really simple 3 sentence point evidence inference. Now, if I was looking for a quote to connect it or to contrast it, I might go for this one. He continued to hold my hand in his feeble grasp and whisper, "God bless you, woman, whoever you are. God bless you," over and over again. Now, in this one, I talked about how he feels frustrated and isolated, that he's unfulfilled. Well, I think this quote very much shows the opposite. That this is a woman, this is a nurse who does feel quite fulfilled, who does feel quite satisfied, because you've got patients who are very thankful to be alive. So I said, in comparison, which is my comparative word, Siko's account showed emotional satisfaction despite the suffering around her. When a wounded soldier whispers, "God bless you, woman, whoever you are," it highlights how meaningful her care feels, and so she finds hope and connection in tragedy, while Kay's hospital life seems to drain him of both. So again, I've linked it back to the previous quote. That's all you need to do here, 3 times to get you the 8 marks. Nice and simple, nothing too complicated, no further analysis, just a very brief inference. So let's do one together. Um, and if you can, give me some answers in the chat. I would love to see some cooperation in the session. So the night shifts, on the other hand, made hell look like Disneyland, an unrelenting nightmare. What might be the point here? What's the author trying to tell us about specifically the workplace? What could our point be here? Because we've got the evidence, and then work out what might be the inference. What might there be to work out? I'll give you just 30 seconds, get some answers in the chat. Someone said busy. Yeah, definitely. You could talk about busyness. Anything else? Could you expand further on that? But I think you're absolutely right. Definitely something that's busy. Put yourself in their shoes. If you were really busy at a hospital, how might you feel? That might be our inference. Someone said chaotic, the horrors of the workplace. Absolutely. Crowded. Absolutely. Yeah, I think I'm going to go with this busyness and the horrors. I think absolutely. I think it presents an overwhelming, stressful, and exhausting place to work. That's definitely like the point. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. We've got the evidence. What might be the inference? What can we work out from his life here? I think we're on the right lines with overwhelming, pressure, chaotic, horror. How might he feel in this workplace environment? Is somewhere he doesn't want to be? Nice. Yeah. Anything else? Because I think that's quite a literal way of thinking about it. I think you're on the right lines. I think the difficulty with an inference is just making sure you go that one step further. And the way that I would do it is put yourself in that setting. If you were that person and you were so overwhelmed and you were so surrounded by chaos, how would you feel? Because you're talking literally right now. Yes, it's somewhere he doesn't want to be. Yes, he's overwhelmed. Yes, he's comparing it to a happier place. What's he feeling? Struggling to cope? This is what I went with. I think it's harsh, it's pressurized, it's emotionally draining, leaving him little room for rest and comfort. Is what I would have gone for. Nothing too complicated. Just emotionally draining, chaotic. somewhere he doesn't want to be. Okay, and if I had to compare it to a quote, maybe I'd pick this one. A rough-bearded men stand by and cry like the softest-hearted woman at the sights of suffering that they saw. We talked, the point of this one is that it was overwhelming, stressful, and exhausting. Is there any way that this might contrast to the previous quote? Because this one, both of them sort of convey a stressful, chaotic atmosphere, but they do it, I would argue, slightly differently. Frazzled, possibly. What kind of emotions are conveyed by this? You've got full grown men crying at the women and the suffering. If you were in that position and you saw suffering and you were crying, how would you feel? Even though she faces issues, she still adores her work. Absolutely. I'm going to go with that. I think it's, yes, both workplaces are busy and there's suffering, but in our second one, there's compassion and there's a humanity to it. But in the first one, you've got a place like hell where there's no humanity, that it's so emotionally draining, that it's so torturous. Whereas in the second one, yes, there's still suffering, but it's there's compassion, there's humanity there in the nature of it. And we've got our quote. The inference, I would maybe go with what it implies, that even in the chaos of war, there's empathy and emotional connection. Whereas Kay's workplace seems dehumanizing, C calls is full of shared humanity, even though there's suffering in both. Okay. We'll do one more example, and I'm going to briefly mention Educast. So, again, I would highlight the context themes. For this question, we're looking at the writers' ways that they try to get to sleep, most of which fails. So the focus is on the ways that the writers are trying but failing to fall asleep. So, again, I would go through and highlight my quotes, and this is what I would get. So, thinking about the quotes that we've got here, then. Is there anything we could mention here about a potential point that we could make? Because we're thinking about the ways that they try and fall asleep. It's told us that they use autogenic training, a form of self-hypnosis. She memorizes the script um, to focus on bodies from limb to limb, and then she's asked to repeat the exercises 3 times a day for 15 minutes each time. What might be the point here about ways that they've tried to fall asleep but failed? What kind of ways has she used here? As the author used, I should say. I'll give you a couple of seconds. If I get nothing, I'll tell you what I thought. Okay, this is what I went with. So I think there's almost a calm and self-control to the ways that she's trying to fall asleep. The fact that she's gone through hypnosis, that she's memorizing a script that's to do with her body. She's trying to relax her body. She's repeating the exercises. I think it's all about control. It's this repeated attempt. And we know that the evidence, which I've highlighted here, she uses autogenic training to reprogram her mind, which requires her to memorize a script to focus on our bodies, which she has to repeat 3 times a day, 15 minutes each. I guess the strict repetition and structure make her technique sound mechanical and disciplined, as if she is forcing herself into calmness through control. Her effort to sleep becomes like a routine or rule she must obey, revealing how desperate she is in order to achieve sleepiness. So the kind of way that I went down is that it's routine. She's got repeated things. She's trying hard to relax. Meanwhile, a next quote, you could talk about this. How might this contrast what we just said about routine? You'll just get up and strike a light and read. You'll go to the cupboard and get a bit of cold chicken. You walk to the window. How does that contrast the previous quote? How is it different? We saw routine and strict control in the first one, but there's very much a difference in this second one. Any ideas in the chat? No? Okay. That's what I went with then. I think in this first one, there's more of a chaotic and impulsive, I guess, of atmosphere of trying to fall asleep. The first one was rigid and controlled, whereas this one is chaotic and impulsive. She's just doing things, she's just trying random things, showing her lack of control. The quotes, exactly as I just put them there. And I think the inference, what I can learn from that, is that this rapid shift between ideas tells me that she's restless. It mirrors that restless energy, that chaos compared to the first one. And unlike source A, who clings to the structure, Vern's disorder and frustration make sleep impossible. So again, three simple sentences. Okay. I was going to get you to select the quotes, but because of time, I'm just going to do it. These are the ones that I would have gone for, again, thinking about sleep. So I tried giving up coffee, sugar, and heavy dinners, hypnosis, therapeutic electromagnetic mattress to recalibrate my energy, and sleeping pills. What might be the point of this one? Was it telling you about the ways that this person has tried to sleep or get to sleep? What methods have they tried? Is there any link between the methods that they've tried? Any ideas in the chat? Yeah, 10 more seconds. Been quiet this evening. Okay. Oh, nice, amen. Trying new things means that nothing seems to work. Yeah, possibly. Yeah. Think about what ways they've tried. Is there anything you can link? Where you can link them? Because I personally think they're kind of logical. They've got science behind them. Coffee has caffeine that keeps you awake. Sugar keeps you awake. Heavy dinners keep you awake. Therapeutic mattresses trying to recalibrate her energy. They all have a scientific basis behind them. So I think it's a practical and scientific way of trying to fall asleep, almost as logical and determined. And I give him the evidence, and I think it shows her approach to sleepiness is like a problem to be solved. She's trying the scientific method. She's trying to see what works in order to kind of give herself discipline to overcome the problem. Everything here is logical and backed by science. And then equally on the opposite end, you have this person who's saying the multiplication table, repeating poetry in the yard, or counting to 100. Very much the opposite of this. The first one was logical and scientific. This is just random. It's childlike and pointless. You know, telling me that it's quite almost foolish compared to the first one. Telling me that almost she feels quite trapped and desperate with no method or control. So you've got to think about how it contrasts and how it differs from the first one. You should always be looking for quotes that are opposite to each other. Okay, but I want to briefly talk about Educast as well. Um, the same skill, but asked slightly differently. With Educast, you get paper 2, question 15, or 1.5, whatever you want to call it. Same thing, you're using both complete texts. And it will say something like this. Using information from both texts, explain briefly X, Y, and Z. And it will give you the context points as well. The tips are very similar compared to AQA because it is the same skill, except the difference between Educast and AQA is that you can mention similarities as well as differences. But with AQA, it's just differences. And again, you still don't need to mention methods, no language or structure, only very simple inferences with some very well chosen evidence and a quote for each point. Except with Educast, it's only 4 marks instead of 8. So you don't need 3-point evidence inference, you just need the 2. And you'd get those 4 marks. So a much simpler way of doing it. And very similar, looking at the mark scheme, to get the band 4, they want you to synthesize and provide a good range of relevant details from both texts. And when it says synthesize, it means the inference. It means you to have that little bit of explanation there. So what I would do as a little bit of advice, always make it clear to which text you are referring. So in your answer, you should always be saying in source A or in source B. And then I would always use a comparative term. So contrastingly or similarly or however, just something that shows you are either saying a difference or a similarity. And I'd use 2 points and quotes from each text to get my 4 marks. So we'll go through a few examples for the next 10 minutes. Again, step one is the same. Highlight those context terms to make sure that you're very aware of what the question is asking you. So in this example, it says explain briefly the immediate reactions the authors had when they heard that the fishermen and soldiers were in danger. So the focus is on immediate reactions upon hearing danger. Not to be confused with the later actions, because in the text there is a section on that as well. So be careful. I also briefly wanted to say with Educast, the quotes will more likely be limited to smaller sections rather than AQA, which tends to be spread out as well um, across the whole text. So I've isolated the sections here for you for our example. But yeah, they would tend to be within smaller sections, kind of all linked together. So look out for that. So I've highlighted our quotes for this. My example, I'll talk you through, and then we'll do one. I'll get you to do one. Pick 2 quotes and give a point, evidence, explain, link. So the quote for text A, I've gone with, I dropped everything. And then in text 2, rushed outside without covering on her head or feet and grabbed a coil of rope. To me, both writers react instantaneously when they realize people are in danger. And they do so on instinct. They do so without hesitation. And I'd say that's my point. So the first person literally drops everything. She just stops what she's doing and reacts instinctively. And the second person doesn't even grab a covering. She just does things without hesitation, instinctually again. So I'd say this is a similarity. So if I was to use quotes, I'd say in source A, Eileen Jones says, as soon as my alarm paper went off, I dropped everything. And the inference tells me that her response is automatic. She doesn't think about the repercussions or the risks. She just does things to save lives because it's part of who she is. And it tells me that she does so with urgency. Similarly, if I was to think about the next quote, when Ida hears about the soldier's perils, she rushed outside without covering on her head or feet and grabbed a coil of rope. And similarly, her lack of concern for her own comfort or protection shows the same instinctive bravery. Both women act before they have time to be afraid. So there's a similarity there. So I would still structure it the same. Look for multiple quotes that are similar or different, and then give a little sentence of inference for each. But in this kind of Educast example, you can just use 1 point rather than 2 different points. So it could be point, evidence, inference, evidence, inference. Slightly easier, I would say. Then if you were thinking about 2 different quotes, maybe you went with this one. If you're first to arrive at the lifeboat station, you've got the responsibility of taking the boat out in those conditions. Compared to, the sea was heavy and a fearful gale was raging, but jumping into the boat with little thought of her own safety. Again, I think this is a similarity. They both act independently, with very little worry for themselves and for their own safety. They prioritize the safety of the fishermen and the soldiers, both of them. This woman just, despite the harsh conditions, takes the boat out. She just does it. And then this person, again, despite the fearful gale and the raging storm, she also just jumps on the boat without thinking of her own safety. So that's a similarity. And again, I'd use the quotes. So in source A, Eileen Jones says, a fearful gale was raging, but jumping into her boat with little thought of her own safety. This shows her selfless attitude and her care for others as she disregards her own safety to prioritize the welfare of the other drawing fishermen. Similarly, in source B, when Ida reaches the lifeboat station, she accepts the responsibility of taking the lifeboat out in those conditions. Her lack of concern for her own comfort or protection shows the same instinctive selflessness. Both women enter a lifeboat in a treacherous conditions, caring more for others than themselves. So, this time, again, I want a little bit of participation, and I think this might be the last one that we get to do. But this time we're thinking about the focus is on the food and drink consumed by Jimbo and its effects. So again, I want to highlight that in the question it says, explain briefly what the two writers tell readers about Jimbo's food and drink. It doesn't just have to be statements of fact. It could be the effects of that food and drink, not just the actual physical descriptions of it. So here are my quotes. Okay. Um, the ones that you will go through and you'll just pick out relevant quotes, but let's focus on these ones. Source A says that Jimbo had a perfectly sound state of body and mind. And the second source B says bad toothache caused by a monotonous diet. They found clear signs of damage to his teeth and indications of infection. How are these two quotes different? Any ideas? We've got one that thinks he's a perfectly state mind and body, and the other which shows he has an infection. Any idea how we could make a point from this? Any ideas? No, okay, I'll go through them. This is what I went with. I think both writers present contrasting views about the health of Jimbo caused by his diet. The point could be as simple as that. Text A claims Jumbo became a fine-looking creature in a perfectly sound state of body and mind. This implies that the keeper believed the diet he provided was successful and improved Jimbo's health. So thinking about health. However, text B refers to the health complications caused by his diet, such as damage to his teeth and indications of infection. This suggests that modern research questions whether Jumbo's diet was suitable and implies it may have been contributed to his health issues. So the difference here is the health. It's about one thinks it was a healthy diet, the other thinks it's not. And we could link that by saying this contrast shows how perceptions of Jumbo's diet differ between the Victorian and modern scientific analysis. So yeah, contrast in state and health. One shows the effects of food and the other shows the benefits of food. Absolutely. Okay. This probably, yeah, this will be the last one that we get to do. So, have a think about this. Jumbo's daily diet is composed of hay, oats, and bread. His monotonous diet largely of sticky buns and hay. Is this a similarity or a difference, do you think? And if so, what is the point that is being made? What is the similarity or difference? I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it in the chat, and then we'll be done. Any ideas? If not, I'll go through it. Differences, one is healthy and the other is not, possibly. I mean, they're very similar. The hay, oats, and bread, sticky buns and hay. I guess sticky buns is kind of bread. But I get what you're saying. Oh, we got disparity. Some people saying similar, some people saying difference. I thought it was quite similar. I thought that both so the Jumbo's diet was quite tightly controlled, either way, by humans and lack variety. I mean, healthy versus unhealthy. I get what you're saying with the oats. I guess you could. I mean, I'm not discounting that. I think that is a valid point between healthy and unhealthy. Um, Either way, I think that the diet is quite tightly controlled by humans, and either way lacks variety. They only ate hay, oats, and bread, and hay and bread. It says that his diet is monotonous. It tells us that, telling us it's the same all the time. Text A states that Jumbo's daily diet is composed of hay, oats, and bread. This suggests that Jumbo ate the same foods every day, showing strict routine and limited choice, which reflects the strong human control over his diet. Similarly, text B refers to Jumbo having a monotonous diet that includes basic foods such as sticky buns and hay. This implies that Jumbo's diet lacked the range he would have had in the wild, reinforcing the idea that captivity restricted his natural feeding behavior. And you could link that at the end by saying both texts therefore highlight how Jumbo's diet was repetitive and carefully regulated by humans, emphasizing the loss of freedom caused by captivity. What is monotonous? It just means really boring and the same, like constantly the same. Okay, so next time then, we will look at OCR and Edexcel, and then we're going to move on to AO2. And we're going to start AO2 by looking at structure rather than language because I think people struggle with that more, and I think it would be more beneficial to focus on structure. But otherwise, have a lovely holiday away from school. We will have a session next week if you want to attend. Again, we won't be doing anything too heavy um, because there are limited numbers, but we are on next week. Yes, I will stay around for a couple of minutes to answer questions, by the way, but otherwise, have a nice holiday. I will upload all the slides tomorrow when I'm in. Um, is it helpful to attend lessons if they aren't on our exam board? Yeah, because the way that I've organized this is I've organized it by assessment objective. And the assessment objectives are the same across all exam boards. So the skills are exactly the same. The difference is how the questions are asked. But what's required is exactly the same. So it doesn't matter if you don't do ADXL or it doesn't matter if you don't do AQA or Educast because the skills are exactly the same. So you'll benefit either way. That's the beautiful thing about English language. Um, how can I use ambitious vocabulary in my everyday life? I would recommend getting one of those apps that gives you like a new word every day, um, and just practicing. Learn the definition and just practice using it in sentences. It's quite difficult to use it in everyday conversation because sometimes ambitious vocabulary can be quite formal. But I just practice, even if it's just in the mirror to yourself, just practice using it in different sentences, if that makes sense, is where I would do that. When you were going through the OQA, when you said to do three, is it three fully separate paragraphs as you demonstrated only two? Yes, sorry, just for time purposes, I did two, but it is three fully separate paragraphs, is what I would do. So point, evidence, inference times three, basically. In 2028, so you'll be in nine. That yeah, you'll be in nine, right? So you've got a lot of time. You've got 2.5 years to get some ambitious vocabulary. It's good and it's useful to start now, to start earlier, because it means by the time you get there, you will be very familiar with language, and you'll have a benefit over a lot of your peers. So it's very useful to get earlier on. Any other questions before I leave you? Good. I'm glad you're aiming high. You absolutely should aim high. I'd be concerned if you weren't aiming high. Okay, right. I will wish you a nice holiday, and I will let you go. Have a lovely week off school. I might see you next week if you want to come. Um, otherwise, have a lovely holiday, and yeah, take some time to yourself. I want to study medicine. Do it. Study medicine. I study biomedicine. Um, so do it. I would say do it. It's absolutely yeah. Okay, right. I will see you.